Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And you are seeing me once again with lecture 27 of modern novel, that is novel 2. In today's talk we are going to continue with our discussion based on chapters, and I'll try to cover up from chapter 27 till the end of it. And once we are done with it, we will try to move on with discussion on themes and some critical reflections that we would like to consider for our detailed discussion later on. Alright, so starting with today's talk, we are at a point in the story in A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, where we know that on the rooftop, after the victory celebration is over, Fielding asks Aziz to be kind to Adela and to sue her, not to sue her for damages. So this point may enable you to recall what happened in our previous discussion, where we left our story at the point where Aziz was able to win the case. In fact, Adela lost her case against Aziz, and Aziz was given freedom by the court of law. And now Aziz's lawyer Amit Rao is basically launching or suing Adela for the damages cost. However, on the other hand, we know that Fielding is a kind party for both of these characters, Aziz as well as Adela Quested, and not only towards Aziz, but he has his kind heart after knowing the honest dealing of Adela Quested regarding this matter, and especially for Indians. So Fielding is there to convince Aziz not to sue Adela Quested for the damages. Aziz plainly refuses in the beginning, telling that this has caused him not only physical loss of different things across the country. However, it has been a lot of emotional damage on his part too. So Fielding tells Aziz that Mrs. Moore is dead, but Aziz refuses to believe him. Aziz has a special bond with Mrs. Moore, and he finds her to be one of the lady of her own kind, who's very kind-hearted, and by face she looks the most generous lady he has ever come across. And now when Aziz breaks this news of Mrs. Moore being dead, Aziz plainly refuses to accept it. So the novel shifts back to Mrs. Moore and tells that Mrs. Moore died somewhere in the Indian Ocean on the way back to England, and she was buried at sea. A myth about Mrs. Moore spreads around Chandapur, and rumor has it that Ronnie killed his mother to prevent her from testifying in defense of Aziz. Places rumored to be her grave start collecting little rituals offering as if she were a goddess. Ronnie feels somewhat responsible for his mother's death because he pushed her to leave so soon in the middle of the heat, and this all happened because of this trial that started with Adela Quested's hallucination. But Ronnie explains away the guilt with the thought that it was partly her fault for being so difficult. He decides to break off his engagement with Adela after Aziz's suit against her for damages decided. Now, moving on with the chapter 29 and 30th, we see that after the kerfuffle around Aziz's trial, the Lieutenant General visits Chandapur. He considers himself more enlightened than the rest of the civil administrators and takes a liking to Fielding too. The Lieutenant General comments that the local administrators have made a mess of things, and he will ask them to reinstate Fielding to the local club. Adela continues staying on at the college, and Fielding stays at Hamidullah's. Fielding attempts to help Adela to write a letter of apology to Aziz, but they both realize that the letter is unsuccessful because Adela has no affection for Aziz or for Indians in general, or for anyone at all. Adela concludes, even Ronnie. This shows Adila's mental state of emotion, that she does not like anybody, she does not love anybody. So Aziz abruptly decides to drop his suit because he decides that that's what Mrs. Wood would have wanted. Well, the suit dismissed, Ronnie finally breaks off his engagement with Adela, and Adela is devastated but not surprised. She leaves Chandapur and on the ship ride back decides that she has to look up Mrs. Moore's other children, Ralph and Stella. So after the trial, things are pretty good between the Hindus and the Muslims, joined as they are by the mutual hatred of the British. Thus, the guy who presided over the trial asked Aziz to write a poem for his brother's journal. So Aziz finds himself unable to write a poem. He wants to celebrate India, but he can't. He decides the holy cure for his writer's block is to get out of British India, and decides that he's going to find a job at one of Hindu princely states. Hamidullah doesn't want Aziz to go at all. He chides Aziz for dropping his lawsuit against Adela and asks Aziz if he's heard the rumor going around about Fielding and Adela having an affair. Aziz is irritated by the rumor but half believes it. And then moving on with the next piece of plot, we see that Fielding has been away at a conference, so Aziz isn't able to confront him about the rumor of Fielding's affair with Adela immediately. When Fielding returns, Aziz meets him at the train station and Fielding invites him to dinner. On the ride into town together, Aziz notifies Fielding that there is another scandal afoot. Mr. McBride was caught having an affair with Miss Derrick, and Mrs. McBride is divorcing him. So of course what Aziz really wants to do is find out about Fielding and Adela. Aziz finally confronts Fielding about the rumor, which Fielding dismisses as ridiculous. He calls Aziz a little rotter, which Aziz finds horribly insulting. At the hospital, Aziz leaves Fielding, who continues on to the post office. There Fielding sees the collector, who invites Fielding back into the club. And the collector makes it perfectly clear that they are inviting Fielding back at the Lieutenant General's request, not because they feel sorry about the way they treated him. Fielding shows up at the club to acknowledge his reinstatement into the club. He chats with a few people, including McBride, who's not sorry at all about his divorce, and a couple of new faces too. Now Major Callender has been replaced by Major Roberts, the new civil surgeon, and Ronnie has been replaced by Milner, the new civil magistrate. New faces, but Fielding the same club, the same hearts, the same mind stream behind that. And at dinner, Aziz and Fielding have an awkward conversation that jumps from topic to topic. Fielding mentions that he'll be returning to England soon for some school business. Aziz then wants to talk about poetry, and Fielding expresses his hope that Aziz will continue writing poetry. Now Aziz asks Fielding if he's going to see Adela in England, and Fielding replies that he might. Aziz gets annoyed but says he has a headache. Fielding apologizes for calling Aziz a rotter earlier. Aziz forgives Fielding, but as Aziz leaves the college, he feels out of sorts. At home, Aziz thinks of Fielding and convinces himself that Fielding did have an affair with Adela. Aziz decides to take his children back home to Mausery as an excuse to avoid seeing Fielding before Fielding leaves for England. Now Fielding senses something is amiss and writes Aziz a letter, but Aziz does not like the letter because of its rational tone. Aziz writes back that he won't be able to see Fielding again before Fielding leaves for England because he has to take his kids back to Mausery. Besides, when Fielding returns to India, Aziz will probably be working away at some far-off Indian state. So, disconnecting on purpose with Fielding by giving him excuses not to see him right now when he's leaving India, and not to see him at the point when he returns to India in future too, makes us know that how bad Aziz is feeling about Aziz right now. Alright, so this is Aziz's indirect way of accusing Fielding of running Aziz by convincing Aziz not to pursue a lucrative lawsuit against Adela. After Fielding leaves, Aziz's friends convince him that Fielding did have an affair with Adela, and that's why Fielding convinced Aziz not to pursue a lawsuit against her. Aziz manages to further convince himself that Fielding has actually married Adela, and the misunderstanding got worsened. Fielding passes through Egypt, Crete and Venus on the way back to England. In these places he notices a pleasing sense of form in the architecture and the general environment, whereas in India he always felt that form was lost. Fielding arrives in England in June, where tender romantic fancies are revived when he sees England's summer flowers. So moving on towards the climax, we find that fast forward a couple of years, we are in the place at Mew, a Hindu principality hundreds of miles away from Chandrapur. Professor Godbole is rocking a religious ceremony. The palace is packed with Hindus of all castes. Godbole, as Minister of Education, has the honor of presiding over the choir. They sing and dance to celebrate the birth of God. The hall is surrounded with banners inscribed with messages from poets, one of which is in English, with a major typo, God, Thee, Love. As Godbole dances away, he goes into a trance where he is flooded with random images. He loves everything just as God loves everything. He remembers an old woman from Chandrapur, a reference to Mrs. Moore. He loves her too. Then he sees an image of a wasp. How he could see the same wasp as well as Mrs. Moore isn't explained. But yes, he loves the wasp too. He dances and clashes his little camballs, a happy little bouncy ball of love. The crowd clears a path for the Raja, who is enfeebled by illness. Then, a few minutes before midnight, someone brings out a model of the village of Gokul for a reenactment of the birth of the Hindu god Sri Krishna. At midnight, a conch is blown, elephants trumpet, and incense is thrown, announcing the birth of Sri Krishna. Everyone celebrates. It's such an interesting discussion of a model of a cradle is brought out, and Godbole reaches in and pull out a napkin folded to represent the infant god, and hands the napkin over to Raja, who names it Shri Krishna and places it back in the cradle. This is the explanation of Hindu mythology of Shri Krishna's birth. The Raja is carried back to his quarters, where his doctor attends him, and surprise, the doctor is Dr. Aziz. Though you will not find these details in the movie, and all this is skipped through by moving you from the point where Aziz leaves the city and moves to Mew Hospital. After the Raja leaves, more celebratory including a king of food fight where milk and rice gets poured out over everybody. Everybody makes merry. The chapter ends as Godbole leaves the festivities. He doesn't remember much of the whole thing, but the vision of Mrs. Moore and the wasp returned to him with more vividness. And now what happens that Aziz comes across Godbole as he wanders around after the festivities. And here we are referring to the festivities of Shri Krishna's birth, who is celebrated as God. Godbole mutters something about how he has arrived at the European guest house. Aziz doesn't press Godbole because Godbole clearly wants to be left alone. Aziz likes Godbole. Godbole got him the post at Mew. Aziz also doesn't really want to know if he is here or not. He is Fielding, who has been assigned to visit all of the different Indian states to see what's being done about English education. Well, after Fielding left Chandrapur, Aziz's suspicions were only confirmed when he received a letter from Fielding announcing his marriage. Aziz didn't read any further all along the letter, and annoyed, he destroys all further letter from Fielding and does not read them at all. But Fielding is supposed to be in Mew soon, and Aziz probably won't be able to avoid some encounter with him. That's quite an interesting situation, as well as something that will draw the climax closer. At his home, Aziz discovers a note from Godbole. It's actually a note from Fielding with a little note from Godbole saying that he can't do anything about the note because of the festival. The note is filled with all kinds of little requests for food, mosquito nets. They also want to see the festival. Aziz is sick of showing Europeans around India and tears the note up. He knows that it's probably impossible to avoid them, however, because of the floods created by the pouring rain. And we are entering into the climax, where in Aziz's garden is a shrine to a Muslim saint who is fabled to have freed prisoners from a fort at the behest of his mother. The police looped off his head, but he continued killing off the police until he fell at his mother's door. The shrine to the body is in Aziz's garden. The shrine to the head is further off. Aziz takes his kids to the shrine to the head for a walk. They walk past the shrine to the head, which seems to be infested with bees, to the old fort where the children play. The children report that a couple of visitors are at the shrine of the head. It's Fielding and his brother-in-law. They watch Fielding and his brother-in-law walk into the shrine to the head. They get chased out by the bees. This amuses Aziz, who goes down to see if they need help. It seems that the brother-in-law got stung, and Aziz promises to send down some medicine. Fielding wonders at their treatment at Mew. No one seems to be paying any attention to them, as opposed to the other states where they were made to feel welcome. Aziz doesn't really explain anything. He just makes a few curt replies. As Fielding and his brother-in-law get into the carriage, Aziz tells Mr. Fielding and Mr. Quested to get into the car. Fielding is surprised that Aziz calls his brother-in-law Mr. Quested, and then realizes that Aziz mistakenly thinks that Fielding has married Adela. Fielding has in fact married Stella, Mrs. Moore's daughter, and the man with him is Ralph, Mrs. Moore's other son. Fielding believes Aziz's error to be Muhammad Ali's fault. Apparently, Muhammad Ali wrote Fielding a rude letter for Aziz and kept referring to Ralph as Haslop's brother. So clearly Muhammad Ali knew the truth and hadn't told Aziz. Caught out in his mistake, Aziz angrily states that he's not interested in being friendly with any English person. But when Aziz returns home, he's filled with joy that Fielding hasn't married Adela. And he's happy to have met Ralph too. He had promised Mrs. Moore that he'd be kind to her son. A procession has begun to head down from the palace to the river. Aziz runs to his home to pick up a slave for Ralph's bee sting. He's here to pick up a slave for Ralph's bee sting and heads over to the European guest house where Fielding is staying with Ralph and his wife, Stella. Stella is Mrs. Moore's daughter now. On the way, he sees a boat in the Mew tank, a kind of reservoir. It's the guest house boat, in which Aziz amuses Fielding and the other British guests are rowing. He cynically thinks that the whole thing about seeing India is just another way of ruling India, seeing it in order to control it. Believing everyone to be out on the river, he goes out to the guest house anyway. Thinking there might be some servants there he can pump for information. In the guest house, he finds 2 letters on the piano. One of the letters is from Ronnie Heslop, who tells Fielding to take care of Ralph, whom he considers to be in need of care. Ronnie also forgives Fielding for marrying his stepsister and tells Fielding to tell Adela that he had liked to make up to her too. So Ronnie mentions some of the troubles he has been encountering in his new job, but blames it on the Jews. So the second letter is from Adela, which mentions her feeling a debt to India, a phrase that mystifies Aziz. Generally, he is annoyed by how chummy they all are, referring to each other by their first names, as if nothing had happened. He bangs the keys out of irritation. He is interrupted by Ralph Moore. When Ralph confronts Aziz about his rudeness, Aziz counters that the English, specifically Adela, haven't been all too kind to him either. Well, Aziz offers Ralph his hand, and his attitude softens toward Ralph. Ralph doesn't find him unkind anymore, and Aziz notes how similar Ralph is to his mother in the way that he can tell whether a stranger is his friend or not instantly. But he also adds that he can be Ralph's friend because Ralph is also related to Ronnie Heslop, although, as a matter of fact, he is a Britisher too. Thinking fondly of Mrs. Moore, Aziz decides that he should take Ralph out onto the tank to see the procession as an homage to Mrs. Moore. They row past an image of the Raja's father on a tomb. Aziz tries to keep their boat out of the procession's way for fear of offending the Hindus. He mentions that the Raja is actually dead, a secret that's been withheld from the public so that the festivities can go on unperturbed. Now, amidst much singing, Krishna's float appears in the water. Aziz sees Godbole waving his arm at him, but he's not sure why is he waving his arm. Now, this very scene is not present in the movie. You will find it all in description in the text though, but you will not be able to visualize it in the movie. The float of the village Gokul is also brought out in the water. All of a sudden, Aziz's boat collides with Fielding's, and they all tumble into the water. In the general confusion, the whole celebration also comes to a climax with gunfire, drum beating, and elephant trumpeting. They pick themselves out of the water, ignored by the celebrants who head bar. Reconciled, Aziz and Fielding go out for a horse ride. Aziz explains to Fielding why Godbole keeps refusing to show him the school. There is no school anymore. It's been turned into a granary. Aziz tells Fielding that during the accident in the water, he decided that Adela was brave for retracting her accusation and would tell her so. Fielding is pleased to know that. Fielding is also hoping Aziz will talk to Stella, who believes that everything that happened at the Marabar has been eliminated. So Fielding tells Aziz that Stella and Ralph both suffer from restlessness, and their experience at Miu has somehow eased their suffering. Fielding admits he doesn't understand why they seem to be such fans of Hinduism, even though they don't seem interested in the specifics of the Hindu religion. Aziz admits he doesn't understand Hinduism much either, so they decide to talk politics. Both of them have taken a harder line in their own positions since they last met. Aziz is even more a nationalist, while Fielding scoffs at this idea that India can become an independent nation. So Aziz claims that it's only when India becomes a nation that they can be friends. Fielding asks why they can't be friends now, and they embrace each other, but their horses swear apart. The novel ends with a panoramic view of Miu and the mysterious statement that everything in the scene says in their 100 voices, "No, not yet." And the sky says, "No, not there." So the story ends here. I hope if there would have been any ambiguities, any misunderstandings, any confusions left for you while you were reading the novel on your own, this discussion, this detailed discussion of the chapters would have helped you in sorting them out. Now, based on our discussions and a collaborative understanding of your text reading and the discussions based on them that you watch on screen will help you analyze different themes lying in the story. So, starting with the themes in A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, we could understand there are 8 themes emerging from the text. However, there can be many others too, depending on how you are there to support them and how you bring them out. Commonly observed themes are these 8. And you will see a kind of structure here between these themes, how one theme is giving birth to the other or is in relation with the other. There is theme of power, justice and judgment, friendship, gender, religion, life consciousness and existence, and contrasting regions and race. So, moving on with our discussion on one of them, that is power, theme of power. Now, we understand that the novel is set in India at a time when the country was a British colony. Forster's novel is an obvious critique of the British Empire. There aren't two opinions about it. For more on the assumptions then that one people have a right to dominate another, what people at the time called Britain's civilizing mission is constantly and consistently undercut throughout the novel. The British Empire is portrayed as a fundamentally racist institution that excludes and subjugates others. But the novel is ambivalent about Indian aspirations for independence. So it seems equally skeptical of the idea of India as an independent nation. How can a country with so much religious and social diversity be unified under one government? Well, is the idea of nationhood just as exclusive as the idea of empire? Or is there anything beyond nation and empire, something that includes everyone, regardless of race, religion, or anything else? Now, based on this theme of power that has been discussed in the story extensively, I would want you to think about a few things. And think that how do different characters feel about the British Empire? And mainly what you can think about feeling, you can think about Aziz, you can think about Mrs. Moore, and you can also think about Ronnie Heslop, city magistrate. What are the differences between the English and the Indian perspectives on empire? Again, thinking about these people, going back to their discussions and their dialogues, you'll get to know how do they perceive an image of an empire. And what about the differences within the England and Indian communities? Consider, for example, the differences between Turton and the subaltern, Ronnie and Mrs. Moore, or Aziz and God Bole. The comparative analysis between these characters will help you combine your notes to answer these questions. And you need to also think about this question with relevance to the theme of power, where how do the different characters feel about the prospect of an independent Indian nation? You might want to compare and contrast the views of Aziz, Fielding, Hamidullah, Muhammad Ali, Ronnie, for starters. And another question, what do you think is the novel's general attitude towards the British Empire? To put it bluntly, do you think the novel is saying that empire is a good thing or a bad thing? What evidence can you cite in support of your interpretation of the novel's general attitude? So here I mention again, whatsoever is your point of view, you need to provide an evidence for that. You need to substantiate it, provide a proof from the text, refer to text so you can elaborate on your idea and what makes you conceive this idea. Now, a few pointers to move on and discuss this theme in further details that try on an opinion or two, start a debate or play the devil's advocate, and through its unsympathetic portrayal of characters such as Ronnie Haslop and Mr. Turton, fosters A Passage to India questions the ideological basis for the British Empire. So if you are discussing the ideological basis from any perspective, from nation perspective or from identity perspective, Mr. Ronnie Haslop and Mr. Turton's characters are very important. And Foster's A Passage to India depicts the fractures within both English and Indian societies to show how difficult the passage to India independence was in the early 20th century. So I hope that this will help you understand how you can go about these questions. And the second theme to be discussed is the theme of justice and judgment. Now, while the novel is certainly a critique of the British Empire, it is not a wholesale rejection of everything British, European and Western. Why is that? Well, Western civilization has some pulses. There is the whole notion of civil rights, for one. The notion that all human beings have rights under the law, such as the rights to a fair and timely trial, the right to confront your witness, and that whole innocence until proven guilty thing. That's quite an ironic discussion in the novel, quite an ironic part of the plot. So, and let's not forget habeas corpus, your legal right not to be imprisoned without getting charged. In addition to this vibrant tradition of civil liberties, Western civilization also values dialogue as a way of mediating conflicts and reaching consensus. At last but not least, let's not forget that the idea of universal human rights is also critical to the Western European tradition. So basically, under British Raj, the way the India has been portrayed and the way that their societies have been brought forward, you need to discuss their traditional their traditional information regarding the societies and the law in the background of these societies and these published stuff. Well, of course, I do not say that these ideas are the exclusive property or invention of Western civilization. However, Foster's novel itself invokes both Muslim and Hindu traditions to show how there is a global tradition at work weaving the fabric of a common humanity. So, in the previous theme, when we were discussing the theme of power, I posed a question: what was that made Hindus think or Indians think that they can have a united nation or a government despite the fact that there are so many religions and races living in India? So a common cause of common humanity can be one of them. Think about it. Well, looming in the historical background is not only the 1857 mutiny but also the Amritsar massacre of 1919, which marked the radical curtailment of civil liberties for Indians. Well, the novel takes the occasion of Aziz's trial to show how justice becomes contaminated by the institutions, the civil administration, the military, the court system of empire. Now, a few thinking teasers and few questions that should provoke your thinking about this theme. You need to consider some of the ways that the British characters take advantage of their powerful positions to treat Indians, or as a matter of fact Aziz, unfairly in his trial. And how is Aziz's situation complicated by the fact that he is an Indian subject in a British colony? Moreover, how do stereotypes about the Oriental and the Indian color the British perception of Aziz? Do you think, do they? What are some of the ways that his behavior is misinterpreted in light of those stereotypes? So take a look at how Aziz is treated in the days leading up to the trial. What are some of the rights built into the British judicial system that prevent the British from punishing Aziz without a trial? And note them down, and in the count then discuss your point of view. The novel reveals how racial stereotypes about the inherently criminality of the Oriental prevent the fair treatment of Indian subjects in the British Empire. This should help you in understanding the trial session of Aziz and in general of Indians. Despite the general fiasco of the trial, the novel demonstrates that British institutions such as civil rights are a necessary barricade against the mechanistics of a fundamentally unjust empire. Now, the third theme that we can discuss in A Passage to India is a theme of race, a very strong idea that E.M. Forster conveys and paints on this canvas. In A Passage to India, life in Chandrapur and indeed throughout the British Empire is deeply fissured along racial lines, with the white Europeans on one side and everyone else on the other. In fact, when you recall your movie watch of A Passage to India, you will see that Aziz has been introduced in the movie when his cycle is hit by a tonga ridden by some English guest from England. Indians are referred to as Orientals, an outdated racial term that was applied to everyone living east of Europe, from Turkey all the way out to China. Orientals were stereotypically considered to be exotic, sensual, passive and backward, as opposed to the intellectual, civilized and progressive Westerner part of the world. Thus, Orientals such as the Indians in A Passage to India were considered unable to rule themselves, essentially needing the British Empire to help them towards civilization, despite the fact that they had civilization of their own. Even as the novel criticizes this stereotyping of Orientals or Orientalism, it is itself not entirely free of Orientalist attitude. The narrator makes broad generalization about Orientals, about their psychology and their sexuality, and that shows how entrenched the Orientalist attitude is even in a novel that is sympathetic to them. Well, this makes me recall Edward Said's Orientalism and Brown Sahib, a wonderful writing. I'm forgetting the name of the writer though. So, what can be your thinking lines regarding this theme? How do the British characters feel about Orientals and Indians? What do you think? What stereotypes characterize their attitude toward Indians? Are some British characters more racist than others? If so, which ones and how? You need to provide evidence. Take a look at the social interactions between British and Indian characters. How does race factor into their encounters? Now, finally, consider the ways that British and Indian characters are portrayed in the novel by E.M. Forster. Do you think there is a difference in the way the novel portrays these characters? Do you think that the novel also supports Orientalist stereotypes, or is it trying to criticize these stereotypes? Which side the writer takes? Or both, simultaneously? Can you find specific instances to support your views? And some points that can help you in finding out your answer and probably supporting your answer for it can be, you will find in a Passage to India, racism against Indians can take a variety of shapes. While it is at its most vitriolic in a character such as Mrs. Turton, it can take more subtle forms in the case of an enlightened character such as Fielding. A Passage to India challenges the Orientalist stereotype that Indians are weak, passive and incapable of governing themselves. They need civilization. So the mission of civilization brings British and Britishers and their rules inside India to rule Indians. Another very important theme in A Passage to India is theme of gender. In addition to race, gender also divides colonial society. British colonial society in India, made up as it is of administrators and their wives, is not exactly English society in miniature. It tends to aggravate whatever is most conservative and traditional about English culture, including a traditional attitude towards women as the much weaker sex. The stereotypical idea is that English women need white knights in shining armor to save them from lusting Orientals. Thus, Adela, as an English woman, needs to be saved from Aziz by Englishmen. English women further demonstrates that their weakness by being far more racist than their men. A character like Mrs. Turton doesn't have the benefit of her husband's education or civic mindedness. On the other hand, British colonial society dismisses the Indian practice of parda, or of segregating women from men, as backwards and unenlightened. Despite its criticism of the British colonial attitude toward women, A Passage to India seems to harbor sexist attitudes. In fact, some critics have argued that female characters such as Adela and Aziz's wife are reduced to pawns who are exchanged between men to establish relationships between men, excluding the possibility of equal relationships between men and women. So, thinking lines can include and invite you to take a look at the female English characters who have spent some time in India, including Mrs. Turton, Macbride and Miss Das. Do you agree with Hamidullah's claim that English women are far worse than English men when it comes to dealing with Indians? And how are Adela and Mrs. Moore different from the other females of English culture, English characters? Do you think of either of them as feminist heroines? Why or why not? You need to substantiate and provide evidence for it. Do you think the novel favors the male characters such as Aziz and Fielding over the female characters such as Adela, Mrs. Moore and Stella? Can you point to specific passages in the novel that supports your view? And some points to initiate your answers and you initiate your thinking. The racism of English women in A Passage to India is far worse than that of the Englishmen because the women lack the men's commitment to England's civilization mission in India. And then Adela's courageous retraction at the trial defies the belief shared by the British and Indians alike that women inevitably become racist during their stay in India. And the last theme of today's talk is the theme of friendship. Before the Beatles travelled to India to tutor with Ravi Shankar, Foster had already been loving up the subcontinent. Faced with the machinery of the British Empire and the daunting task of Indian national building, A Passage to India asks us to consider friendship as the solution to these incredibly complex political issues. What makes the novel interesting, however, is its candor regarding all of the barriers the characters face in establishing their friendship, particularly with Aziz and Fielding, who are unable to bridge their cultural and political differences despite their affection for one another. Significantly, Aziz only considers Mrs. Moore and Professor Godbole as his true friends, one of whom is dead and the other is, well, in his own mental universe, a galaxy far, far away from ordinary human interaction. So, take a look at the numerous relationships in the novel which would you characterize as true friendship. Why would that be? And doing that, consider, for example, Aziz and Mrs. Moore, Aziz and Fielding, and Adela and Aziz. What are some of the factors preventing characters who clearly like each other from becoming great friends? What are the barriers? What are the gaps? And here's a hefty one. In what way can we see friendship as an alternative to imperialism or nationalism in the novel? Do you think Foster is just being a way too idealistic, or do you think there is anything to the idea expressed by Fielding that goodwill plus culture and intelligence will build a better world? And some pointers to initiate your discussion can be, because of its idealization of friendships beyond reciprocity, such as that between Aziz and the absent Mrs. Moore, A Passage to India cannot represent the possibility of true friendship in this world, as exemplified in the fraught relationship between Aziz and Fielding. In A Passage to India, friendships model the possibility of a mutually beneficial cultural exchange between Britain and India that does not entail the exploitative institution of empire. So, discussing the theme of religion in A Passage to India, religion plays a major role in the novel A Passage to India, dividing not only the primarily Christian British from the Indians, but also dividing Indian society from within. While Hinduism is majority religion in India and Islam the most significant minority, other Indian religious groups mentioned in the novel include Sikhs, Jains and Buddhists. Ronnie Hislop, the city magistrate, typifies the British administrator's attitude toward all religion, including Christianity, as an irrational system of beliefs. According to him, Christianity is only useful insofar as it provides divine justification for the British monarchy and no more. Well, and India's plethora of religions only underscores its backwardness to someone like Ronnie. The novel, however, explores how different religious traditions, including Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam, might provide a better, more inclusive view of humanity. But no one religion in the novel is valorized over the others as the last word on life, the universe, and everything. The boom, a twist on the Hindu dharmic Om that threatens Mrs. Moore, hold on life signals the novel's general skepticism toward all organized religions. Now, a few thinking teaser will help you understand the things more clearly. A number of different religious traditions are explored in the novel in A Passage to India, including Christianity, Hinduism and Islam. Putting aside what you know about these religions, can you explain how the novel represents these religions? What kind of representation is there? What are the similarities and differences in their general values as depicted in the novel by the writer? So, what are the religious background of the different characters? How do the differences in their religious backgrounds affect their relationships with each other? Some critics argue that the novel sets up Hinduism as a superior religious system to Islam and Christianity because of its inclusiveness. Do you agree? If you do, why? And if you don't, why not? While A Passage to India certainly shows how religious differences divide colonial society in Chandapur, it also shows how the value of love in Christianity, Hinduism and Islam can contribute to a bridging between cultures and religions. While Hinduism is represented as the closest to the novel's principle of inclusiveness, it is weakened by its own internal divisions and caste hierarchies. Then you will find this theme of life, consciousness and existence to be one important aspect to bring in here when you are looking at this aspect. A novel that keeps digging at the way human being draws line to separate themselves from each other, lines of race and culture and nationality, inevitably has to ask, well, what else is out there? If not race, religion, gender, culture, nationality, are very humanity. Who are we? What are we? Why are we here? What is the meaning of it all? A Passage to India suggests that there may not be anything deeper and truer out there. It may all just be a muddle. All of it, ancient civilizations, grand empires, powerful potentates, and the humble peasants picking at the dirt, could be reduced to so much half-cooked pudding, primordial oats. Despite the general quickiness of existence, A Passage to India shows various characters as they strive to give a form to the muddle, to give form as a way of making sense of the muddle. What is this muddle about? What religion is that is supported by the novel and the story? And still the muddle, if there are so many religions preaching all peace and love? Well, think of Foster's form as one of those models you use to make shapeless dough into nifty cookie shapes, or a mold you might use to turn mud into building blocks. Forms help us make the formless and shapeless into something we can recognize and associate with. A gingerbread man, a sand castle. In the novel, somebody like Mrs. Turton might use the mold or form of race to turn humankind into something she can recognize or associate with. English humans, Indian humans. So that's the way you start associating with people. Obviously, the novel rejects Mrs. Turton's mold and the idea. What's the alternative then? How do we recognize people? How do we categorize them? Are there molds, forms that can give shape to human existence without excluding others? Because a world is a platform where several cultures and variations are living and coexisting. Some critics have looked to God Boli's Hinduism, but as the novel points out, Hinduism itself is divided into different sects and castes. So, perhaps the novel tries to embrace the muddle through the form of art and literature specifically. The novel itself could be an experiment in coming up with a form that includes everybody without being a muddle. It may not be successful. See gender and race for some of its limitations, the theme of gender and theme of race. But at least it tried. And as Mrs. Moore puts it, some kinds of failure may be preferable to others. And some more thinking teaser about the term muddle recurs throughout the novel. What are some of the different senses of the term? What does it reveal about the character's attitude? What about the novel's general attitude toward life? Consider Adela and Mrs. Moore experiences in the caves. What does the echo or oboe of the cave do to them? How does it alter the way they look at the world and the way they behave? How does it affect their experience for the rest of the novel? How do different characters cope with the muddle of existence? Some characters you could look at including Fielding, Adela, Aziz, Mrs. Moore and Ronnie Heslop. Well, while A Passage to India emphasizes the fundamental meaningless or muddle of life, it also shows how even in its meaninglessness or because of it, life can be marvelous and extraordinary. Adela's confusion about her attack in the caves is engendered by the profound emotional and intellectual upheaval she experienced in the echo of the caves. So that was all for today's lecture. That was lecture 27, and what we discussed in today's talk, we had a discussion on chapters 27 till 37. We discussed themes, questions and suggestions, theme of power, justice and judgment, gender, friendship, religion, life, consciousness, existence, race and contrasting regions. I hope in the coming lecture we'll be able to extend our discussion more on these issues, and we'll be able to cover it up soon. So to start with our revision series based on all 4 writers we have read so far. This was all for today. I'll see you in lecture 28 now. Inshallah. Allah Hafiz.